All right, let's get started. Thank you for being with us today for this, what hopefully will be a really interesting and engaging session. Today, we're going to talk about helping teens and young adults manage election stress, which is something I'm sure we all know a little bit about. Thank you for being here. I'm Adi Shepin. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at the Jed Foundation. And I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Laura Erickson-Schroth, who I will introduce in a moment. We are also joined by all of you, friends, partners, donors, educators, and others. So we're really happy that you're here. Please feel free to ask questions. You can use the Q&A feature on your screen. We have staff that will be checking them throughout the session, compiling them, and then we'll have room at the end if you want to keep adding your questions in. We're also going to send a recording of this out along with some additional materials. So if we didn't get to your question, hopefully it will be addressed through the materials that we're sending. But please feel free to always write to info@jedfoundation.org. If you have a specific follow-up question, we'll do our best to get right back to you. So let's get started. As I said, Dr. Laura is our Chief Medical Officer. Laura's a psychiatrist specializing in crisis intervention and LGBTQ+ mental health. She's worked in over 10 New York City emergency rooms at Columbia University and is now an associate professor at NYU, New York University. At JED, Laura helps shape research and resources that inform and empower our approach to helping teens and young adults address their mental health needs. Laura, let's start with an overview of youth mental health today. Can you give us an overview and maybe highlight some of the key trends that have emerged in the last decade?
Yes, thank you so much, Adi, and thanks to everyone who's joined this discussion today. I'm really excited to see so many people here. I know you're all excited to think and to talk about the young people in your lives, how they're doing during this election season, how we can support them. So we thought we'd start with just a little overview of sort of, what's been going on over the past decade. And we've seen some really significantly, kind of concerning trends in youth mental health. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people, 12 to 24. A lot of the challenges that they're facing, are factors that are really unique to this generation. So, constant digital connection that didn't exist, a generation ago, the COVID-19 pandemic, climate anxiety and the really real, manifestations of climate change, school shootings that we were not thinking about in prior generations in the same way. They're seeing incidents of violence that go viral on social media, and that have resulted in this reckoning in our country related to racial and social justice. All these kinds of stressors are, magnified by the difficulty accessing mental health care and also by easy access to lethal means like firearms. And so young people today are spending less than half as much time in person with friends compared to 2 decades ago. And that change happened even before the pandemic started. So if you look at rates, from the early 2000s up to 2019 before the pandemic, we're already seeing real drops in time that young people are spending together. And then, once the pandemic hit, global rates of childhood anxiety and depression doubled. And we know that 4.6 million children live in households with at least one loaded, unlocked firearm, which significantly increases the risk of suicide deaths. We know access to mental health care is a really big barrier, that 40% of young people, teenagers 12 to 17 who've had a major depressive episode over the last year didn't receive any form of treatment. And we know that young people are grappling with a lot of the things that adults like us are grappling with. So we know financial insecurity is a really big factor. When they look at college students, 3 in 5 college students face some type of essential needs insecurity, not having access to adequate housing or food or affordable health care. And we know that there are particular groups of young people who are really struggling and facing disproportionate challenges. So, an important group to talk about is American Indian and Alaska Native young people. who were seeing very high rates of mental health concerns, young people who are involved in the criminal legal system, who have higher rates of suicide compared to their peers. We're seeing worsening trends among Black youth. They have the fastest increasing rates of suicide, and LGBTQIA plus youth who have higher rates of suicide attempts than their peers. And to address those kinds of issues, we really need to take a comprehensive approach that, involves, developing life skills in young people, getting them connected to community, increasing their ability to reach out for help when they need it, providing accessible mental health treatment, reducing access to lethal means, especially firearms. And we have to create spaces, including online, where young people feel safe. Those are all really critical steps to supporting youth mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of that, resonates, and I'm sure with our guests today too. We have another divisive election to add to the mix now as we head into that season. Before we talk more in depth about what teens are experiencing related to the election, we wanted to do a poll and hear from you all, our audience today. What are you finding the most challenging and about supporting the young people in your lives during this election season?
So you'll see this poll pop up on your screen. It'll be asking you the question, what do you find most challenging about supporting young people's mental health during this election season? And we'll give you a minute or so to answer.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Oh, very interesting results. Not a surprise in terms of how you all answered. We're all supporting young people in our lives, and it can certainly be hard to figure out how to do it well. And we're going to be addressing all of these challenges today that you responded to. To start us off, Laura, help us understand how teens and young adults are thinking about and experiencing this election season.
Yeah, and it's funny. I wish I could hear from everybody else on the other side, because I think you probably have a lot to say. But for the young people that I'm talking with, the first thing I'll say is that they're really active participants in the political process, right? They're educating themselves on the issues, they're signing petitions, they're advocating for causes, for candidates they believe in, they're volunteering, they're voting. Young adults generally have the lowest turnout of any age group. But in the 2020 presidential election, around half of 18 to 24-year-olds voted. We haven't seen those kind of numbers since the 60s and even into the early 70s. And even when Obama was running, which I think is pretty unbelievable, we still didn't see those numbers. But despite all of this participation, many young people are feeling really distressed by our political landscape. So, if you look at surveys of young people, 56% of young people believe that politics today are no longer able to meet the challenges our country's facing. 36% believe that political involvement rarely has tangible results. Over 40% say they think their vote doesn't make a difference. And there's been a steep decline among young people in terms of trust in America's institutions. So since 2015, trust in Congress has dropped 34%, and trust in the Supreme Court has dropped 55% among young people. And I think, this goes really beyond political worlds and political participation. We're seeing young people lose a sense of why they're here and how they can kind of participate in the world. A lot of parents I talk with talk about this. It seems like, young people are losing a sense of meaning. There was a 2023 poll from Harvard's Graduate School of Education that found that 58% of young people say their lives lack purpose or meaning. So this is really important. This is the next generation of people who are going to be leading our country, and they're not feeling connected. And there are a few things that I think that are contributing to young people feeling that way. One is they're seeing news headlines and they're seeing social media posts about issues that are directly affecting their lives, financial issues and the increased cost of living, climate disasters, gun violence. They're worried about decreasing protections for particular groups of people like LGBTQIA plus people, youth of color, immigrant youth, other groups. And they're seeing sometimes politicians talk about these issues in disparaging ways about groups of people that they belong to. And it's making them feel like their future is kind of being decided by other people. And then on top of all that, young people, I think, like lots of us, have to confront, the strain on relationships that this all causes. Family and friends who might hold different political views, kind of navigating those conversations, especially in this kind of highly charged atmosphere. It can be really stressful and it can be emotionally taxing, especially if you haven't dealt with that in the past. So, for young people like all of us, one of their biggest sources of stress right now during election time is this feeling of being out of control. Like they can't control how their loved ones or people around them vote or what laws get passed or what candidates win. And these can have really significant impacts on their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I move on, I did want to address, there's a question that came in the Q&A that I thought is worth interrupting just for a second to clarify. And that is, somebody asked, what age do we mean when we say young people? And, Jed's focus is ages 13 to 30. And I know some of the stats you've presented, Laura, are different ages for different stats. But is it fair to say that when we are talking about young people in the context of today's webinar, we're talking about that broad range of 13 to 30? Or are we mostly talking more about 18 to 24? Can you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most of the statistics that I'm talking about in this webinar are young adults, because we're talking about young people who would be able to sort of engage civically and to vote. So mostly 18 to 24, but not every statistic is the same. And if anyone has questions afterwards, we're happy to send you where we got the information.
Great. Thanks. I thought it was worth, addressing that as we continue in our session referring to young people. So, based on what you've shared thus far, what are the signs that we may notice that indicate a young person is having a hard time, specifically related to the election or political stress?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that we can look for and watch out for in young people during this time. One is sort of what sets off their stress. So, if they're having a hard time relating to politics or to the upcoming election, they might seem stressed during particular family conversations that involve politics, or when the news comes up, or when particular people are around in their lives who tend to talk about political issues. And of course, social media can be really stressful. And it can be hard to tell if a young person who, is using social media, if they're interacting about political issues or not, because you don't necessarily know what they're doing. But they might be seeing content that's really hard to see. They might feel like they need to participate in a conversation, a political conversation, even if they're not sure what they believe or not sure they want to, or they might be getting negative responses to posts about their political beliefs. If you notice that they're having a hard time when they're using their phone, ask about it, approach the conversation with an open mind. It could be about politics, or it could be about, something completely different in their lives. A lot of times that's how you discover, right, is kind of going in and saying, you have an idea of what you think might be going on with a young person. And then sometimes you're right on, and sometimes you're so far off. But giving them the space to kind of do that. And if they're feeling a loss of control during this time, they might be, they might seem angry, they might seem like they're lashing out, or they might seem kind of hopeless about the future. They might be talking about, having more conflicts with their friends at school, or, talk about issues coming up with friends that are related to their political beliefs. And then I always say, don't forget that stress can sometimes manifest in physical symptoms. I think a lot of times we do forget that, but if there's a young person in your life who's having stomach aches or headaches or, sort of like feeling really tired and sleeping a lot, those kinds of things can actually be related to stress. And you might notice that has to do with timing of specific events like debates or people they have to see who talk a lot about politics. It could be stress related.
Yeah. What are ways that families or an adult around a young person can support young people who might be having a hard time during this period?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably why we're all here, is to think about that, right? And I always say start with yourself. The first thing to do is to spend time thinking about yourself and what you're feeling. I don't know about everyone else on this call, but as adults right now, we're having a lot of the same experiences that young people are having. We're uncertain about the future. We're afraid of what might happen. And we have to get in touch with those emotions to be able to take care of ourselves, to be in a place to take care of other people. We have to know what we're feeling. So then, once we've sort of been able to think about that a little bit, and obviously it's an ongoing process, there are a few different ways that I like to think about supporting young people. One is that research shows that participating in civic activities, things like voting, volunteering, it actually can be really beneficial for mental health. It can help all of us, but also young people feel more connected to democratic processes, more satisfied with our democracy and the sort of the government systems that we live in. And that makes sense. When you're part of something and you're participating, you feel more connected to it. So as adults, we can model that kind of civic engagement. I remember when I was a kid, my mom taking me to vote with her, and so it starts really young, and you go into the booth and you see, oh, wow, we have a chance to we have a chance to participate in this. It's very exciting, and I've even gone as an adult with my mom because it reminds me of this connection, right? And we have to encourage the young people in our lives to participate with us, by doing things that we're doing in our communities, like going to rallies, volunteering, canvassing, the things that are important to us, and we want to make sure to encourage them to participate in the activities that speak to them and that reflect their priorities and values, that might always not line up with our own, right? And I think that's really important. Like, the young people in your lives may not have the same political opinions that you do, but that doesn't mean you can't help them to find ways to be involved and to kind of discover who they are and what they believe in. So if you notice that, the stress of participating in these kinds of activities is overwhelming them, if you're sort of like helping them to get engaged, or they're getting engaged themselves, and they're feeling, you get a sense from them that they're feeling stressed, reach out and ask them about it. Talk with them about what you do to take care of yourself. And again, that starts from a really young age. Like, even with little kids, you can tell them about when things are stressing you out. Of course, we don't want to put huge burdens on little kids, but we can tell them, sometimes I have a really hard day too. And like, what I do is I go take a walk, or I take a bath, or I go for a bike ride. It helps them to understand that everybody goes through difficult times and difficult emotions. And then, if they're having a really hard time engaging around kind of political issues, you can suggest, like, it helps me to take a step back or to take a break, and you can do that in lots of different ways, right? One is, some people set time limits for themselves, and sometimes you can set it on an app, and it can do it for you. But it might be about like how much time you spend reading a certain type of news every day, or you have a cutoff an hour before bed to make sure that, news doesn't interfere with your sleep. Another way to approach it is to make sure you're looking at a few different news sources. And, young people have, sort of people they follow online on social media, and they may not be following sort of a diverse group of people. They might be following one specific sort of small group or small community that sort of says the same things. And sometimes getting all your news from one source can lead to this kind of certain way of thinking. And so it's helpful to talk to them about, like, are you looking around and interested in anything else, even if they may not agree with you, is it sort of interesting to hear their opinion? And then I think finally, one of the most important things is to make sure that the young people in our lives really know that during this uncertain time, no matter what happens, we're going to always be there for them. And do not be afraid to tell them that, to say out loud, I know this is a scary time, but no matter what happens, I'm here for you.
Yeah, I think that's something we all practiced during the pandemic when we too felt we were in uncertain times, and sharing some of that, like, I don't necessarily have all the answers either, but I am going to be here for you. I am here for you, and I always will be. It's really, really important to restate. Apologies for the glitch with our colleague trying to join the Zoom in the middle there. If you saw an extra person pop up on your screen, sorry everyone about that. So moving on, so much of what you're sharing, Laura, and what young people are experiencing is related to the conversation happening through social media. There's so much misinformation on social media, and it's hard to know what's real and what isn't in terms of information. So how can we help young people navigate both social media consumption and how to spot misinformation?
Yeah, I think, conversations are happening so differently now than they did, even 10 years ago. Young people are using social media for all of these different aspects of their lives that we never did. They're connecting with their friends, they're finding new people and building new communities. They're kind of following what's going on with celebrities or organizations they're interested in. And they're using TikTok like a search engine, right? Like we put things
Yes,
into
they are.
they are using TikTok, or as Adi likes to say, Chat GPT. Her son was putting things in Chat GPT yesterday. And so, they get political updates on social media too. That's where they turn to instead of traditional news sources. And I think that has positives, but it also has negatives. So, information on social media can feel much more digestible because it's in small bites, right? And it's more sometimes specific to the topic that you're interested in. And it might also feel more immediate compared to the way you see traditional news sources. Although, I don't know how many people are looking at, if you look at Washington Post or New York Times or any of these major outlets, they're trying to do stuff immediately now too, right? They have writers that are kind of basically tweeting as things happen to try to kind of keep up with that ethos. And so social media, like political news, actually can be really interesting, but it can also do a lot of other things that might be negative. It can provide sort of less of a full picture. It might not include a lot of different perspectives, especially because algorithms can end up pushing us towards the same kind of content over and over again and the same opinions. It can be really stressful to see those same issues raised repeatedly. And then, like you said, it can be unclear where the information came from and whether it's verified. So I think, number one, there are a few things I think can help the young people in our lives and also ourselves. Many of us are on social media to kind of navigate the political news in the context of social media. One is to acknowledge and talk about how social media and how algorithms work, to talk with the young people in your lives and have open conversations with them about, what kind of content is showing up in their social media feeds, how the apps are designed to deliver that content, the content that'll get more likes and keep us on longer, not necessarily providing the most useful or truthful information. And a lot of young people are interested in talking about that topic. They want to understand how technology is designed, why it's designed that way. They can probably give you examples of things they've seen that demonstrate how it works. And, hey, if I do this, I can change my algorithm. And once they're having those conversations, you can talk with them about how they can gain, some more control over what they're seeing. One way, of course, is to, use social media less, to look at other media sources, but there are also all these ways to change within the apps what you're experiencing. So each app has a different way of doing that, but they all have a search function. And they all have the ability to choose, who or what you follow. So a good first step can be searching for topics you're interested in. If you want to see more content on something, for me, I got to a point at one point where I was just seeing too much political content and things like that. And so I just started searching for guinea pigs and puppies. And now my social media content is wonderful. It makes me feel joyful, right? I was like, I want to change up the algorithm, and you can. Um,
I love
you yeah, I mean, you can also like add accounts, that you think could provide you with like new or different opinions. It's important to be clear, they can try those out, and then if you don't like what you're seeing, you can always unfollow it. It's not like you have to stick with it. And then most apps also have ways to block accounts that you don't want to see, or a great feature is to mute accounts. So if you have someone who that you want them to, know that you're still following them, but you don't want them to know that you're not seeing their content, you're not interested in that right now, you can mute them instead of blocking them. Especially that works especially well for friends, for young people. And there are all kinds of settings to block certain content or keywords or phrases. So sometimes making those kind of small changes can really, affect the experience in a really positive way. And then when it comes to misinformation, I think, we can all be misled. But there are some sort of ways that we can sort of begin to start to figure out what's real. Most important is, again, to get the young person in your life on board for that process. I think teens like love to be detectives, right? They're always detectives about our lives, right? They're like, interesting, are you doing that? But the more you get them thinking and talking about these kind of issues, they're able to, you can show them content that pops up on your phone and say, do you think this is fake? Ask them what they think, see if they've run into, accounts or posts that they're suspicious of. You can help them think about what they're seeing. There are some cues that we might know about as adults that could, tell us that something might be intentionally misleading. They might tell us about, oh, I noticed that like, this picture looks doctored for this reason, and they kind of can spot these things. I think a couple things to look out for. The more unbelievable something is, the less likely it is to be true. That's just how the world works. So, strange things happen in life and people act unexpectedly for themselves. But if something seems unbelievable, you really want to kind of check into it. And one way to do that is to check the credibility of the source. So like, is this person an expert? Did they go to school for this? Do they have training on this topic? Are they putting up links to credible sources like, government websites, nonprofits, research papers, and thinking about what their motivation is for sharing the information. Are they trying to push some kind of agenda? There are lots of really good websites that can help you, kind of dig in and be a detective with the young person in your life. There are fact-checking websites that look at what different political candidates are saying, whether those statements are true. There are sites that help you compare on an issue what different media companies are saying. I think that can be really interesting because you can see like the government put out this announcement, and then you can see one type of newspaper titled it this, and another type of newspaper titled it this, and it really skews the way you think about the data that's coming out. And there are also websites that look at, how biased media outlets are. So they could tell you if a news agency skews in a certain direction politically. They can how likely that news agency, whichever direction it skews, is to provide accurate information, because it could be a right-leaning or a left-leaning, news agency, and it can really vary in how accurate the information is. So I know that's, a lot to think about, and you all are probably thinking about a lot of these things already, but the important part is that the young person in your life is doing that thinking with you, that they're interested, that they're curious about what they think and what their process is for vetting what they see. And if they can tell that you care about how their mind works and how they're seeing things, they're much more likely to want to engage with you about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all really, really good tips. And we'll reiterate them in the materials we send out, everyone, if you weren't able to sort of capture everything while Laura was speaking. This next question we got a lot. A lot of people were asking this, Laura. What are some strategies for supporting young people in constructive political conversations. How can we help them with that?
Yeah, it's hard if we're not always able to do it ourselves, but we're
Yeah.
doing our best. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is an issue that a lot of us are dealing with, and not just young people. Whenever political conversations come up, there are going to be these differences of opinion. It can be really emotional, especially for young people, engaging around politics, because this might be the first time they're seeing that people are talking about something where there's consequences that are very real for their lives that could change based on the political scene. That may not be something that they had sort of known about when they were children. And so there are some things I think about, sort of both for myself and for other adults, and then as well as for young people when you're thinking about having conversations. One of them is, before you enter a conversation, asking yourself if you're sort of in the emotional headspace to have that conversation. Depends on the day, and it depends on how we're feeling. Sometimes when you're feeling really stressed out, or on edge, or you're angry about something else, or weighted down by all the election stress that's going on, it might not be the best idea to talk about politics in that setting. So, really being honest with yourself about your needs, and making a decision that's really, for the best for you. And then if you choose you do want to engage in that conversation, I think one of the things that's really important that we can help to teach young people is, helping them learn about what it means to have conversations where each person learns from the other person. Talking about how to start conversations in a way that opens people up, that where you're curious and respectful, and it's really common to feel judgment about other people's political beliefs, because sometimes their beliefs really affect your life. And that's true, but it's also important to see what you can learn and understand from their experiences. And so I think modeling that and demonstrating it, that you have people in your life who you don't always agree with, but something about talking to them helps you to understand what's going on. I think it's unlikely you're going to change their mind. And so I think it's important to be real with young people. Transparency and authenticity are these words that young people use a lot, and they mean it. And they want us to be open with them and say, yeah, actually, it's probably not likely you're going to change your uncle's mind, but maybe you could learn more about, where he comes from and why he thinks that way. And maybe that'll help you to understand him and where he comes from, and other people who think the way that he thinks, so that you can just encourage them to ask people, help me to understand, why you think about it that way, and how you got there. And then, sometimes there's conversations where you feel like you'd actually be better off not having that conversation. And this is another place where you can model for the young people in your life, like, hey, sometimes I'm not ready to engage in that conversation at that moment. And that's a place to teach them to be honest, to express their boundaries and say, things like, maybe this conversation is getting a little challenging for me. It's bringing up a lot of feelings. Could we move on to something else? Or this is a really difficult topic for me. I think especially like young people can be stuck in situations that are really hard, because a lot of times young people don't have control over where they are. As adults, we don't always either. Many of us are in meetings with people who have different opinions, or, we're also at family functions where we're kind of stuck with different opinions. But for young people, that happens even more, because other people have control over their lives. And so they might be around people with political opinions that are really different from them. And it might even make them feel scared or threatened. That could happen in larger family get-togethers. It could happen at school. It could happen, in religious communities. So I think, starting with listening to the young people in our lives and hearing why these things are hard for them, and helping them if we can. We don't want them to be in situations where they're scared, or someone's saying something that is really scaring them. But if it's a situation where they're not, scared, they're just upset. Again, showing them that we have to be in those kind of situations too. And it's really hard. And how have we figured out navigating that when we're sort of stuck hearing opinions that might make us feel angry or hurt? And what, what we all do in that situation is different. What kind of works for you or your coping style? Some people like to sit back and disconnect a bit and not really engage, or other people actually, it feels good to them to engage more and stand up for themselves and say what they think, and it makes them feel like they have more of a sense of control. But the most important thing is, to have conversations with the young person in your life, as you're going into these kind of situations, and make sure they know, like, this is something that you're facing too, that we all face, and that you're there for them and you're supporting them in choosing how they want to approach it.
Yeah. And I think giving them the language and the tools to extricate themselves from uncomfortable situations, because they don't know how to do that often. So even role playing or practicing, or like, literally, here's a sentence you can use,
They have to see it modeled, and we do too as adults. A lot of times, I don't know about you, but like, I'll hear someone say something in a meeting and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to note that. That was a really helpful transition.
Right. No, absolutely. I want to get to some of the questions people have been typing in. So let's start with this one. How can I invite my college-age student to share what they're experiencing on campus if there are protests? How can I encourage them to stay safe, take care of their mental health during what could be a stressful situation?
Yeah, I think this is a big one, and especially we're in August and young people are going back to school now. Some of them as late as September, but many right now. And they're feeling this really wide range of emotions around the political protests that are going on campus. Everything from some of them feeling pressure to, present with a certain political view, or feeling upset that, other students or adults don't understand, what they believe or how they're feeling. Some young people are feeling scared. They're experiencing being targeted as part of a particular group. And again, the most important thing is for them to know that you're there for them. So checking in, sometimes it can feel far away, but like sending a text, leaving them a quick, voice message, being curious about how they're feeling. And it can be really simple. It can just be, how are you doing? How's school going? How do you feel? Those kinds of things. And, at first they might not want to kind of wade into those political topics. Maybe it's not something they want to, they talk about it all the time with people at school and they don't necessarily want to talk about it more. They might want to open up about other things that are going on in their life, to talk about their, academic work, or, a club or a team or friends. But that can sometimes lead to them talking about some of the, feelings they have related to political topics on campus. It'll be woven into the stories that they tell you. They'll mention a friend and then they'll talk about that friend's actually involved with one of the encampments or something like that. So you'll start to hear about these kinds of things. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think it can be really tempting to assume you might know what's bothering them, because you might say, well, if I were in this situation, I would feel scared, or I would feel angry, or I would feel helpless, or whatever it is. But often if you give them the space, they'll end up telling you about something that you hadn't thought about at all. Like, oh, this isn't bothering me at all, Mom, but like, this is, so you have to really be open and ready to hear what they have to say. And then of course, if there are, real safety issues, if you're hearing about something really concerning, you want to let them know that you're concerned. And you want to encourage them first to be the ones to reach out for help, rather than intervening. If you can help them to think about what are the ways that you could reach out to administration or do things that would help you to feel safe.
Yeah, great. This next question came a fair amount also, which is, young people they're feeling a sense of futility, helplessness, they feel sometimes like they can't have an impact on some of these big issues. So how can we help with that specifically? And let me just say, unfortunately, this is going to be the last question. We've received a lot of great questions, but this will be our last question. Then we can send more in follow up. But what do you think about that one, Laura?
Yeah, and that's something we touched on a little bit earlier. I mean, really, with the polls that we're talking about, with young people feeling this like decreased sense of connection and meaning and purpose. They're not sure where their lives are taking them. They don't know how to find that. And I think we've learned over our lives, each of us, how to make meaning of, why we're here and how we're participating in this world. And we're going to be able to help young people do that too, in probably very similar ways to the ways that we were able to do that, but they're always going to have their own spin on it, right? So there are a couple of different ways that everybody, finds that kind of meaning. One is, as humans, we find meaning through relationships with other people and connections to communities. They might not be the same communities that they were for us as they are for the young people in our lives. We also find meaning through feeling connected to the world, what we're doing in it, So I think we have to encourage young people in our lives to sort of find things that inspire them, that get them excited, feeling a part of something. So there are tons of ways to do that, right? There are political ways to do that, but then there are also, finding other things that they feel connected to, music, books, crafts, sports, anime, whatever it is. They may not have the experiences that we do in this area because they haven't spent the kind of time that we've spent engaged, socially with other people. They've grown up, with, the internet and phones and all those kinds of things. And so we know that human connection is super, super important, and getting, involved in communities is important. And we have to, again, demonstrate to them how important that is. If they do want to get involved in sort of political activities, again, volunteering and civic engagement actually really is so powerful and helps people to feel connected in a sense of meaning. And, I would say, as beneficial as civic engagement is for them, it's also really good for us that they're getting engaged. They're bringing their energy, their perspectives, their commitment to these kind of causes and candidates and, communities. So, I hate to say like the children are our future, but I really think that young people are going to be, leading the charge, and we have to help them to find their sense of purpose and ways that they can lead in the future.
Yeah, all really good advice, Laura. And I'm sorry, we did get more questions and we just can't get to all of them. I know there were some questions about concerns about voting rights and concerns about, potential violence at voting polls. And we'll try to answer in follow-up emails for some of the specific questions that came up that we didn't get to. Thank you, Laura, for sharing your wisdom with everyone today. Thank you, all of our attendees, for being here, for caring as deeply as I know you do, and for joining us at Jed in this work to protect emotional health and prevent suicide. It is our deep mission here at Jed, and we can't do it without you. And we feel strongly that it's everyone's responsibility. So by having you join us, we know that you're in it with us. We will send a follow-up with notes with this recording, with more resources. We're going to be publishing more on our website, so keep checking back. And of course, feel free to reach out directly, info@jedfoundation.org, and we will make sure that email gets routed to somebody who can get back to you with information that you're looking for. Until next time, take good care of yourselves. Enjoy these last few weeks of summer, and thank you again. Bye.